I believe that the climate change platform is actually not legitimate in my mind, because it's being run by people that are now going to benefit on the other side of them saying, oops, we made a mistake for 90 years. Now we're going to solve it. And you're going to go through our companies and our means of like solving this problem that they
Yeah.
basically created in the first place.
Mm.
Right. But having said that, do I think that, Gaia, Mother Earth, like everything that provides a sustenance should be protected? Absolutely. And I think that it's really up to us as individuals to make those daily choices and to insist that we get access to, clean water, that we get access to unpolluted foods, that we understand what's in our foods. Like, how are you processing our food? What's actually in this? Because they don't have to describe that to you on the set of ingredients. So for me, climate change is very much I'm not part of the platform. I'm not buying into the platform. I'm not going to be based on fear. I don't believe that our world is going to end in the next 100 years. I believe that we are supposed to be here as human beings and we can provide a lot of value to the planet, but our perspective on how we interact with the planet has to change. And that comes
Yeah.
from an individual rather than being, programmed into it.
Yeah, and I was hinting towards the end of the thing in a kind of sardonic way, saying, we kind of are so kind of told to panic about the end of the planet, but it looks like we're kind of being told lies to not look at the truth, which is we are being poisoned, and we are being poisoned by the various narratives when it comes to the food narrative, when it comes to air pollution, and it's being done in such a deliberate way, saying, "Oh my God, look at the pollutants," when it's coming into your house, right? Whether it's under the guise of supermarkets or under the guise of your governments or the local um, water stations pumping in water. It's not about what is just on the store shelves, but if you just breathe, like I live in Bangalore, which is a pretty heavily populated city in India, and
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like sitting there smoking a cigarette, I'm going, this is really bad for me and the planet. Maybe more for me because I think the planet has bigger lungs. But then I'm just smelling the air on the road, which is about 100 meters from my house, and I'm like, this can't be good for people who are non-smokers because there's so much crap out there, and even in the water. Because in India traditionally we used to boil the water and drink it, and now
Right.
there are so many of these systems like reverse osmosis or alkaline water and all these things which come through machines, right? And they're fed through these pipes and they're processed. And even concepts like the microwave, of course, they've been around for many, many years now. But I'm not saying ancient India had it all, but the idea of going down, picking up fresh vegetables from the day, for the day, cooking that. Now we've kind of taken the Western approach of refrigeration. And I'm, again, don't mistake me, I think there's some great benefits to refrigeration because you can't get cold beer from a pot. But there are excesses now because I think it's almost like a blind following of a narrative, which is this is seen as the new conveniences that you just undoubtedly have to have: the television, the refrigerator, the microwave, get processed water. And of course, I don't want to get a bad stomach from bad water, but doesn't that take away the accountability of the people providing the farmers with good soil, as opposed to just pushing down really, really horrible pesticides and kind of phasing out the farmers who can't afford, who won't go on board? I mean, it starts from that
That's
end where
right.
you have high farmer suicide in India. You have no support for the ones who don't want to go on pesticides. Then you have all these various supply things, which I can't sit in Bangalore in a big city and say, I don't know where my food comes from, but I can maybe, because I have some money, I can go to a friend of a friend who started, say, aquaponics or hydroponics, whatever it's called, farming, and he specializes because he's got his father's land and he can do it. But that's not scalable. That's good for 10 families who can afford it. But I don't have a question here. I'm just sort of rambling a little bit. But I just don't understand, how do we change this individually, right? As you said, it's important because you've done this when your son was 5. You moved
Mhm.
away from the corporate world to kind of know what you're um, in some way you have an oversight of what your children are exposed to, especially with the most essential things, which is food and water and the things that go into their mind and body, which automatically makes them healthier and able to face the environment. But when you look at the options on a global scale for individuals, um, is it sustainable to for I mean, I think it's essential that each person looks after the food they eat and the water they drink, because without that, you can't really go work and become a CEO, which is now the new narrative, right? So what is your take on this, as in how do we take the next steps forward without going all into a panic about climate change and fatalistic views about the planet ending, but in a more sensible, in a more kind way, kind of understanding the situation? And again, because it seems like only people who have the opportunity to take a step back and not just work in India, especially a lot of people who work on daily wages, they don't know what food they're getting, and they get these things called the ration cards, where they're just given grain and lentils and whatnot, certain basic rations to live on by the government. And when you talk to people who come home to work, they're like, yeah, half of it is filled with worms and half of it is filled with stones, and you don't. So I'm just trying to get a picture which is not too overwhelming, but at the same time try to understand, without too much money, is there a way of taking control of the food you put into you and your children and your family?
I think that's what you've touched on is really vital. And I would say that it's not just, I'd say that it's probably more obvious in some countries like India right now. But it is going to be hitting us globally, all of those issues that you've just touched upon, because the food system has basically been taken over by corporations. And the corporations are pretty much all run by the same individuals. When you're in publicly traded companies, there's three different companies that basically own pretty much the world. They actually own, I think it's 70% of the actual fund management is owned by pretty much one or two major players. So you have real consolidation globally on the food chain. So my response to your question is, when you have like this massive like monster that's taken over like basically our necessities of life. I look back on, what my great grandparents did, and they came to Canada as immigrants and farmed and had, a pretty rough life. It's not fun farming
Yeah.
in freezing cold conditions with a blizzard of snow,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like it's
I
a
mean,
bit
neither is
different
it in like
than,
50
yeah.
degrees of heat. Yeah. I mean, it's farming is
Yeah,
hard.
like
Let's accept
we
that. Yeah.
hide in our homes for 5 months of the year and then venture out, like
Yeah.
literally. So I look back on that and I think that it's really taking first of all, it's acknowledgement that this is actually happening. The second thing is, okay, how do I basically, how can I get around this? And one thing that I'm saying to people all the time is buy seeds, grow as much as you can, tiny little pots on your windowsill. If that means that you're getting like just even your coriander or your basil or your parsley or whatever, just something that's live and green that actually is feeding you. Like there's things that you can do to help, at least give yourself some nutrients, and some like live enzymes are vital. So our fruits and our vegetables are really important to get that live enzyme in. The other thing that I would suggest is what you commented on, which is basically getting those community networks together. Like you're saying, oh, it's not sustainable, it can only feed 10 families. Well, 10 families is huge. And you know what I mean? Like that's a lot. And if you can create those types of relationships, and again, supporting locals, supporting those group of people that are just starting out feeding those 10 families, and then they might get to 20 families, and then they might get to 50 families. Like that's a potential new business. And my feeling, and I say this to my kids and my kids' friends, because they're coming through a system now and they're questioning, do I even go to university? Is it worth it for me to spend all of this money and go into all of
Mm.
this debt to get a university degree when I can't even get out and get a job and like get a sandwich?
And look at the
Like
people
what
running the
is,
universities. Yeah.
yeah, like what, like really, there's those big questions now that have to be asked. And I say to my kids and my friends of my kids, we're in a new world. Like we really are, and there's new opportunities. So as much as it's like fear factor on one side, I see it as hope and shifting on the other side. So if some of those people that are going through and they get their bag of stuff and they're like, oh my gosh, there's rocks in here, I'm not going to eat rocks. I'm not feeding rocks to my family. I've got a small little patch in my backyard. I'm going to grow some of this. I'm going to do some of this. So maybe we can trade off. Like we're back to, I think, like that old traditional time where it's like barter system. And I personally believe in that because I think everybody has God-given skills and they should be able to use those and trade those without an intermediary. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I think it's imperative to understand what's going on, to create community where you can, and to take individual action where you can, which is growing your own food, cleaning your own water, being responsible for that, learning about it, and then putting that out into the universe and saying, okay, local people, state people, provincial people, federal people, what are you doing? Why am I paying my taxes if you can't even give me clean water? There's questions that can be asked as well. So I think it's almost like a shift in perception that needs to happen, and then individual responsibility that then is networked to community.
Yeah. No, because sometimes um, the grass is always greener, right? I'm sitting in the city and I have a friend who has moved back to a small town near his village, and he's gone back to help his mum who's getting on in years, and her and his brother who basically run a farm, and they have a couple of cows, and he was talking about how hard it is to get help to sow the seeds and reap the harvest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be great to live like in the on a farm, um, with my baby girl being 19 months. It'll be lovely for her to feel that soil beneath her feet and run around, put her hands on, in the moist mud after a rain. And but then I'm sitting here in an apartment in Bangalore with all she's seeing is traffic noise. But there are other conveniences of living in a big city with an apartment, right? Um, so the thing is, like, it's hard for people to even keep their land because I know someone who's got a piece of land he shares with his brothers, and like, he first of all, just to put like power backup or to build a small shelter or to keep a crop alive, it's so difficult. And it's so easy at the same time when a real estate developer says, hey, you got a couple of acres of land, I'll give you this, at that point in time a seemingly large amount of money. And this guy's, I mean, I wouldn't blame anyone because, like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. Why should I struggle for three crops to come because of uncertain rains now or lack of water? I'd rather just take this money and run. And so many situations like that. So as a result, what's happening, as you pointed out earlier about the big corporates, it may not be directly them controlling it, but a lot of agricultural land is going into the pockets of these real estate developers illegally in many cases, because in India we have this thing where agricultural land can't be developed without being converted under a certain license. It can't be developed into commercial properties. But there are these guys who are real estate developers who are hand in hand with the political clout of the state or the city, and then they just acquire, in many cases, disputed land, which they kind of strong arm the farmers into selling, because they're like, you know what, your neighbor sold it, this thing sold it, so if out of 400 acres you'll be the only 1 acre there, and look what we'll do then. And they've sold the land. Now they have no money because they're told that 10 lakhs, which is about um, I think 10 lakhs, about 6,000, no, it's about $12,000, is a lot of money. And it is a decent amount of money, but it's not going to last you like that land will if you use it well. And now,
Yeah.
next thing you know, these huge, vast tracts of agricultural land outside the city of Bangalore are now just becoming these massive apartments, which,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, in many cases don't have water. So they have to bore 1,000 feet, build a bore well. They have to build now, if there are, earlier that land was 2 acres of just farming, which would then be again regenerated in the soil. Now it's just concrete, covered in concrete. It's got maybe 10,000 or 5,000 flats with people and parking. And of course, it has beautiful gardens, which are landscaped with lawn and grass. But I'm just thinking, you live in Canada, which of course is also got a lot of wilderness and it's got a lot of farming historically. But of course, like Canada and India, you have the big cities like Toronto and British
Mm-hmm.
Columbia, and but this uncontrolled growth. Again, I went around the world to come back to this point. Is when I sit here, I've had the opportunity to go live in the US, do my undergraduation there, get exposure to ideas from there, and also, you know, look at the landscape, right? When you go out of, say, I live near Portland. Portland's a relatively big city, but then you go to the college town I lived in, it's farms. You got huge tracts of land. You got a lot of wilderness. If you go further west or south into Oregon, or a lot of America is green. And in India as well, there is that. But how do you tell someone who's never seen money, keep your land, it's pure, because we don't know when we might need to grow our own stuff, when they're being offered a check for $20,000 or what not. And how can we deny them growth because they want that, right? It's being constantly pushed to them. The narrative on YouTube, seeing the millionaires, billionaires, seeing these
Mhm.
big cars and the big highways and the big cities and the smartphones and the clothes and the Amazon apps and the Flipkarts, which are local shopping networks. So how do you control? Because I feel that's where the message to the individual is being manipulated, of this need for greed, this need for a better
Mhm.
and more, the need to get a bigger house, the need to get a faster electric bike. Or I'm saying the consumption is what is driving the greed, and the greed is driving the consumption. But at the same time, you can't tell a person who's never had money that don't eat crisps or chips from Lay's. You know how bad a company it is, or don't drink Pepsi because you're going to get juvenile diabetes. But if I go say that, they're like, yeah, but you know what? You have money and you chose not to, but or something like that, right? But it's not easy when the narrative on the consumption level is driving all these habits, and is at the end of the day ruining the environment around us. And I say environment, I mean the natural habitat, and also the way in which habitats are being developed, as opposed to just earlier it would be a small house with a big garden so you could play around, but now it's
Yeah,
the entire
exactly.
house is developed into this concrete mass.
Yeah. And I think your point is very poignant. And I think that the the answer to that is that as individuals, it's vital that we actually develop our own discernment,
Mm,
because what is being pushed doesn't work. And all you have to do is go to any large US city and see how this system does not work.
mm,
People are not healthier. People are not, they might be eating food, but their food is making them sick. It's making them basically part of a system of medical assistance. So they're living longer, but their lifespan is less enjoyable because they're ill for a very large part of it.
yeah,
So my response to like your points is that until we as individuals get the discernment, and I'll give the example of a Tesla car, and not to
yeah,
pick on Elon, but come on guys, like we're being sold a car that's supposed to be good for the environment because we're no longer burning, gas, but we're basically using a car that has been mined, that battery has been mined by child labor, 9 out of 10 times child labor in horrible conditions in these mines. And I know that because I was a director of um, a company that basically produces environmental bacteria that is all organic and basically helps crops grow and also helps stop dust particles on mining roads. So
right,
we were very involved in mines internationally and had an understanding of what they did. So I do have some level of knowledge about it, but how all of the battery inputs are mined is actually like gobsmackingly disgusting. And what it does to the environment and to the water systems around those mines is so damaging. And then we take that battery and we stick it in this like lovely car that's been marketed by a marketing genius, um, and told that this is good for the environment. And as we're sitting in that car, and you touched on this, the EMFs, the electromagnetic frequency that is basically burning into our bodies and messing up our entire like biological system is off the charts.
mm,
So we're paying a lot. Think about how much money a Tesla vehicle is. We're paying huge amounts of cash because we've been programmed and marketed to think that this is an environmentally conscious car. I'm going to get into it and feel really good about myself driving through the streets of Toronto or through Delhi or wherever you are internationally, doesn't matter. Pick one big city. You feel like, you're on top of the world driving your Tesla because it says something. But in fact, if you actually use your discernment and your God-given brain, you actually understand that this is a complete scam. Like, it's a scam. And not only that, but those batteries, so you're basically burning up in that car, like you're literally frying like a micro. You are like the hot chocolate in the microwave. Okay, like you're just bubbling up,
And your
right?
brain's the marshmallow. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. If you're so lucky to get the marshmallow.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're basically microwaving ourselves, like very expensive. And then when that car dies and that battery has to be replaced, it's 40 grand to replace that battery. And it's like a piece of junk that goes into landfill that then never stops in terms of its toxic give back. So we have to really, I think, stop and start asking bigger questions. And when we start doing that, things will shift because they have to.
Yeah.
And all those landowners, I know their pain. I've seen it in Canada. I've worked closely with farmers. I know the pressure that they're under, and it's actually horrific how little help they're getting, and they're literally being targeted.
Yeah.
But the best thing that we can do as individuals is to support those local people doing those local things.